Hello, everybody. My name is Emma, and I am a consultant at the Writing and Communication Center. Today, I'm going to be going over how to structure your Chemistry 1300 lab reports. But firstly, before we get into that, I want to show you how to register for an account and create appointments at the Writing and Communication Center. So you're going to want to type in your search bar nova.mywconline.com if you do not have an account yet, and this is your first time on our site. Make sure to go here, first visit, register for an account, and I'm going to walk you through how to do that. So to register, you're going to want to fill in these cells with your name, your email address, your student level, major, language, phone number, preferred pronouns, and create a password. You can play with these system preferences here and then click this verification and click create account. Now, once you've done so, you're going to want to log in, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. You're going to need to select a schedule number 2, undergraduate fall 2025, and click login. So you're going to open up to this schedule. The white boxes mean that those are open appointments free for you to schedule, and the blue boxes represent appointments that are already made, so you cannot use those options. Up here, you have 2 filters. On the left, you have a full master list of all of our consultants. So if you have a consultant that you already know that you want to work with, you can go ahead and select them here. So for example, I'll just click on myself, and all of the times that I will be available are on the schedule here. Now, if you also wanted to come in for a lab report, you can filter by biology or chemistry so that you will be shown a list of consultants who are specially trained to help students review and structure their lab reports. So you can go ahead and schedule with one of them. Now that we've gone over that, let's actually go into the structure of your lab report. Firstly, this is super important for us. If you could just quickly pause the video and scan this QR code and fill out this really quick pre-survey, that's going to provide the Writing Center with a lot of important information on how to help you in the future. So please, we ask that you pause the video now and fill out that brief form. So pre-writing and formatting. Include your last name and page numbers as a header in the upper right corner. And that is going to begin on page 1, which will start after your title page. So your title page is going to look like this. You're going to have the title of the experiment at the top of the page, your name, your lab partners' names, the name of your course, so Chemistry 1300, the name of your instructor, your laboratory assistant's name, if you have one, and then the date the experiment was performed. So not the date that you're writing the lab report, but the date that you did the lab. And then that's going to be followed by your abstract, which I'm going to go over later on. So you're going to be writing in past tense third person. For example, one 500 milliliter volumetric flask was used to store 100 milliliters of deionized water during the experiment. Do not use any personal pronouns or names such as the student or the experimenter. And that would sound like the student used a volumetric flask to store water during the experiment. So you're not saying I used a 500 milliliter volumetric flask. You are saying the flask was used. When you're writing, you want to make sure that you're being specific and descriptive, and you should be including units for everything that you write, because if not, you are going to significantly decrease the validity of your results. The written order of the full lab report should be as follows. So you're going to begin with your abstract, which is followed with your introduction and your materials and methods, followed by the results section, calculations, discussion, conclusion, post-lab questions, if you have them. Not all labs will have post-lab questions. As a student, you should be looking at your rubric to determine all the sections that are required for each individual lab. And that's going to be followed by your references. So your abstract. Your abstract is basically going to be one big summary, except it's at the beginning of your lab report. It should be about 200 words as per the recommendations of the ACS. It should fit on the title page, so it should not go on to page 1. And it should include 5 little mini summaries of these sections: introduction, methods, results, conclusion, and discussion. The components of your abstract should have the purpose of your experiment. It should write what processes or theories were utilized during the experiment. So, was a calorimeter used? Was a Bunsen burner used? And what was the purpose of using those things? A summary of your procedures, and you should be stating your results, not explaining them just yet. And you should reject or fail to reject your hypothesis. Introduction. The following is recommended. You should begin with the purpose of your experiment and you should end with the hypothesis of your experiment. So you're starting with some really, really general information and then you're going to narrow in on the hypothesis at the very, very end. The entire introduction should be approximately a page long. Do not include any data from the experiment in this section. You should describe any devices or lab apparatus you're going to use, any concepts explored in this experiment, or old ones that are being used again, such as enthalpy, calorimetry, etc., and any equations used and the purpose of those equations. So your materials and methods section. Now, before I go into how to write the section, I want to mention that it's important to take notes during the lab on any changes that were made by your professor so that you can remember when writing this section. There are 2 ways generally to write this section. So you refer to the handout and instructions from the lab manual for details, and you describe any changes to the original procedure outlined in the handout or the manual. So for example, if your professor changes the measurement for a solvent you're supposed to be using from 5 grams to 0.5 grams or anything along those lines, you should be writing down what exactly was changed so you can explain in your materials and methods, because that could also affect the validity of your data if there are things that don't particularly align. So you want to make sure that you're taking note of any of those procedural changes. And if no changes were made, then you could just state that there were none. So the first way that you can complete this section is you can simply just state that the lab manual is where you got your procedure from. So for example, you can write, please refer to experiment 5 on pages X to X of Laboratory Manual for Principles of General Chemistry by J.A. Baran. One deviation from the experiment was that 0.5 grams of the salt were used instead of 5 grams, and there were no other deviations in the experiment. And then the second way that you can do this is slightly longer. You can write out all materials in detail along with the procedure. You can include a paragraph describing in detail all of the apparatus used. You can include a paragraph describing the procedure in detail in your own words. And keep in mind that this should be written in paragraph form. You should not be listing anything, or you should not have any bullet points. Okay, so your results section. For your Excel, you need to be including your Excel formulas. You have to use the equation tool on Word, and you need to be centering the equation on a separate line. For your tables, they need to be numbered and they need to have a title. So in your title, you should be writing table 1 and then the title of the table. And that should be followed by a brief description that includes the purpose of the values in the table. So, for example, table 1, the effects of blank variable on blank variable. Table 2, the effects of blank on blank. And your graph should be exactly the same. You should be numbering each of your graphs as a part of the title, except instead of table, it's going to be figure. So figure 1, figure 2. And then you're going to include a brief figure description as well. So in addition, make sure you're grouping your graphs and your tables when you're presenting them on the lab report. So if table 1 and table 2 associate with figure 1 and table 3 and table 4 associate with figure 2, you should be presenting them in that order. So not all the tables and then not all the graphs, to make sure that when your professor or laboratory assistant is reading through your lab report, everything is organized, it's cohesive, and they can follow along easily. Calculations. Each calculation used to create data for the results section must be typed out and labeled properly. So they cannot be handwritten, they cannot be a photograph, they cannot be scanned. It has to be manually typed on your keyboard, and you only need to include the calculations for the first trial of data. The discussion section. This is going to be your longest section. It's going to be about a page and a half long. You're going to need to analyze the results and explain the significance. You need to note general trends, highs and lows in those trends. You should be writing in chronological order. Do not, do not just restate the results. Explain why those results occurred. What is the reasoning? What led to your conclusions? Connect the results to the theory. So the theories that you presented originally in your introduction, now we're circling back and you're going to explain how the results that you obtained now relate to the theory that you spoke about in your introduction. You're going to explain why you did each step of the experiment. Don't just restate the procedure. And if an outside source is needed to support the results, please include it here. Your conclusion section. Explain the results and whether or not the hypothesis is rejected or failed to be rejected. Include sources of error. So, similarly to the materials and methods where you're noting down changes during the experiment, you also need to be taking notes on potential sources of error during the experiment so you can remember when you're writing. And those cannot be human errors. So if a salt was measured incorrectly, leading to incorrect results, that's something that you did wrong that led to um, invalid results. But a acceptable source of error is a non-human error. This is what your professor is going to be looking for. If some of a solution evaporated in the middle of an experiment leading to a decrease in salt abundance, it is a source of error because it is a natural phenomenon as a part of the experiment. So that's not something that you did, it's something that happened by chance. Using more trials cannot be mentioned as a source of error. Make sure that you're explaining improvements that can fix the source of error that you listed. So, for example, due to the natural evaporation of the solution, a cover glass should be placed on top of the solution while it is not being used to limit the evaporation. Your post-lab questions. Again, as I mentioned before, not every lab is going to have post-lab questions. Make sure that you check your rubric to know exactly which sections you are going to be expected to include. But should you have post-lab questions expected of you, they should be numbered and typed, and there should be a visible difference between the question and your answer. So, typically, you can bold the questions and you could indent the answers, not bolded. And finally, your reference section. So, your reference section should include your lab manual cited, your textbook cited, and then outside sources cited depending on the rubric and as long as it's a credible source. So, a great place to find those is the library databases. I know a great one is PubMed, but there are plenty others, and there is a ton in the database that you can refer to. With that being said, that is your final section expected of you in your lab report. So make sure that if you have any questions, you book an appointment with the Writing Center, and one of our Chemistry 1300 consultants will be happy to meet with you. But I hope that this video was helpful. And as always, the Writing Center is here to support you. So please make an appointment should you need any additional assistance. Thank you so much for watching.